Welcome back to Lit by the Fire. So excited to be with you this evening as we continue Barbi McSwain's The Mountain, Johann's Journey. We left off at a bit of a cliffhanger with a new character named Abernathy Sullivan and Millie Grub, highly suspicious characters, interviewing Johann inside of a decrepit hut thing in the middle of this forest on this mountain. So Michael was coming in quick for a rescue. Let us see how this all turns out, shall we? We pick up the story with chapter 11, Michael Gets Some Help. He's ours now, Michael, and there's nothing you can do about it. Just go on back to your little village. Say goodbye to your little friend. The man's laughter echoed through the woods, beating against Michael's head. Even after the hole disappeared and he was left staring at tree bark through hot, frustrated eyes, the laughter continued to echo in his ears. Turning toward the main path, Michael ambled along. He thought of nothing but how humiliated he felt. He didn't care about Johann or the Willbenders or even Good Master. As he walked, he wiped an angry tear off his cheek, but as soon as his face dried, his eyes would fill again, trying to spill out all his pain and embarrassment. How he wished he could keep the pain inside, like Johann always did. Michael had never seen Johann cry. He had seen him sad and angry and hurt, but he had never seen him cry. His chest began to throb, and he put his hand over his heart as if its pressure would soothe the pain. He felt the whistle. Reaching into his shirt, he pulled it out and held it in his hand. Its gold was so beautiful and warm. Michael longed to use it to summon Good Master, but he dared not. He could not bear to have Good Master see him like this. How could he tell him what a fool that fat old Willbender had made of him? Why, even Good Master in all his kindness could not help but see the humor in the scene. A boy pleading with a fat old man, "Please, sir, give me my friend." Michael mocked himself aloud. "I'm sure you had him trembling, Michael." In his despair, Michael didn't notice the sun setting on the horizon in front of him. When he finally looked up, he could see the lights of the village below in the valley, which extended beyond for miles. Other mountains far on either side of the valley enclosed the serene village like a vast framed picture. However, the scene did not comfort Michael. None were as great as the mountain on which he stood, the mountain that kept the secrets of the mysterious treasure hidden in its paths. Thoughts of the treasure saddened Michael. Why did Johann have to be so insistent and impatient about finding riches and power? Once again, anger flushed his cheeks. The night air was dry, and Michael was exhausted. So he unrolled his bedroll without a thought about food. The moon was now beaming over him, lighting the ground where he made his makeshift camp. Thousands of stars twinkled at him in the clear night, but he did not notice them. Still unable to blow the whistle, he clutched it in his hand. Michael lay on his bedroll. His father would certainly be disappointed in him. If Grace Hobbs ever found out, tears began to burn his eyes as he fought to keep them from falling. He thought of Clarence Tully. No one had seen him in years. Finally, he rolled over, clutching the sweater he used for a pillow with one hand, and pounded the ground angrily with his other clenched fist. A few feet behind him, there stood a silent figure in the dark trees, watching. When Michael had finally quieted to sleep, Good Master stepped into the small clearing beside the path where the boy lay. He knelt down, looking at Michael's sleeping form. "Sleep, my little warrior," he spoke softly. "Your joy is soon coming." He gently touched the boy's face, then disappeared into the trees. Dawn broke with its usual splendor, undaunted by the previous day's heartache. Michael peeked out of his blanket, remembering the night's anguish. He wondered when he would ever put away his childish fits of emotion and confront challenges as men do, with calm, dried-eyed resolve. Looking up, he could see the dark outline of the mountain against the pink and orange glow of the sun creeping up behind it. The mountain was large and wide. He didn't feel so much like a climber. The ground where he lay was as flat as the path before him. It did not seem to incline up the side at all. Looking at the path caused him no happiness. The path was a familiar one, and he had not intended to travel it alone. He knew it would be an easy hike down the path to the village. The paths, another piece of information that he didn't have the chance to tell Johann. The paths change, so that if a climber quits, the path back might well be a mudslide or jagged rocks or a series of cliffs from which he could fall. The injuries could be very serious. Michael's dad had told him that most find the way back worse than the main path itself. Once they decide to resume their original task, the journey back to their place of departure takes a very long time. Oh, good master can't let that happen to Johann, thought Michael. He had no intention of talking to good master until he regained some kind of confidence from yesterday's onslaught. But the thought of Johann being at the mercy of the unmerciful mysteries of the mountain caused him to grab the whistle and blow into it time and time again. Michael, I'm right here, said good master. But Michael kept blowing almost hysterically into the whistle. Finally, the man pulled it from his mouth and repeated, I'm right here. What's the trouble? Oh, good master, you can't let that happen to Johann. He doesn't understand what he's doing if you don't help him. In desperation, Michael began to yell, why don't you do something? Willbender's mysterious paths, the rains, the fog, and all those things. Good master put a strong arm around him, but Michael pulled away, his anger still lashing out at the man. He's my friend. Don't you care what happens to him? Michael didn't understand why he attacked good master with his frustration. He didn't want it that way, but yelling at a mountain only frustrated him more. Michael, stop it. The sternness in good master's voice lashed through the air. You have the power to change the situation, but you have to use it correctly. Now you can, of your own strength, begin to avenge your friend from the grip of the Willbenders. But as you saw yesterday, it won't get you satisfactory results. Michael's eyes widened and his mouth hung speechless. He knew everything that happened yesterday. Why? He was probably right there and did nothing. Confusion clouded his thoughts. What did I do wrong? You simply didn't call me when you needed me. You had the Willbender right there, and you didn't call me. That's what they all do, every time. Good master walked a few steps away from him, then turned abruptly to face the boy. This is your battle, Michael. I don't need to fight it for you just yet, but I will fight it with you, if you allow me. Now come, let the two of us reason this out together. He led Michael to one of the many large flat stones which were scattered along the path, and they sat down. Michael wasn't certain whether he should start talking or wait on good master. He wanted to say so many things, ask so many questions, but his immediate concern was Johann's safety. Good master, will he be safe? I mean, we haven't lost him for good, have we? No, Michael. As long as there is one person somewhere who cares enough for his safe return, he will never be lost. I know it appears he's been quite misplaced, and I think spending some time with the Willbenders might bring Johann closer to the treasure. But how can that be? Why, their sole purpose on this mountain is to prevent the treasure from being found. Yes, that may be their intention, but as clever as their tricks may be to lure a traveler from the path, they are never too clever in taking him very far from the treasure. If you think about it, Michael, what better guides could one have? Michael pondered these puzzling words for a few minutes, then stood up, pacing in front of the man. Goodmaster smiled as he listened to Michael mutter, "Perfect guides indeed. Take him about as close as a fox takes a chicken to a chicken hawk." Michael stopped abruptly, then turned to face the man. "Goodmaster, I can't do this without you. I need your help." Goodmaster slapped his knees and then stood up in no great hurry. "It's about time you asked. I'll tell you what, Michael," he said, smiling. "You continue along the path. I'll keep an eye on Johann for you, and I'll make sure he catches up to you safely." "But when? How far do I have to travel by myself? This just isn't at all what I..." Michael lost his speech as well as his ability to look at Goodmaster when he saw the man's eyes looking right through his very soul. His eyes were a mirror that reflected what Michael detested, a confused, fearful boy. It was a painful reflection of a boy he was all too familiar with and one he did not care to look upon. With his eyes fixed on Goodmaster's feet, he said, "I'm sorry. I'll continue on the path." He walked over to his pack and lifted onto his back with such weariness that Goodmaster came up behind him and, putting his arms round the boy, squeezed him tightly. The gesture almost took his breath away, but after he released his hold, Michael found he had a renewed strength. He smiled at Goodmaster and headed down the path. After going a few yards, he turned around and yelled back to Goodmaster, "Please don't take long, sir." Goodmaster smiled at his friend and then raised his hand in a farewell gesture and replied, "I won't." Michael continued on the path with a song in his heart, but he couldn't remember the words, so he listened to the morning birds instead. Goodmaster, however, bore no such gaiety as he disappeared into the trees, a strong resolve in his steps. All right, Chapter 12, The Rescue. Johann pulled a thin blanket over his shoulder, and the makeshift cot squeaked with this slight movement. Abernathy Sullivan had insisted Johann spend the night after dinner. Johann's objections were fruitless, and since he couldn't find his way out of the tree anyway, he obediently retired to his squeaky cot. Abernathy, however, had bid them good night and slipped mysteriously out of the tree's wall. Milligrub had scurried around the room, piling dirty dishes on a shelf. His bed was a shallow depression in the floor opposite the peculiar doorway. He was now curled up like a cat, with his knees drawn up to his furry head. With each breath, a deep whistle rumbled in his throat. A tallow candle on the dining table cast hideous shadows around the room as it burnt out. Fear began creeping into Johann's thoughts as he wondered how he would ever escape from this room, and the slow realization that he was a prisoner swept over him like a wave of nausea. Abernathy's questions kept echoing in his head. Johann rolled onto his back and looked at the tiny flame. "He may not want you to have the treasure." He rolled to his other side. "How do you know Goodmaster advised you honestly?" And so Johann tossed and turned through the night until morning. Johann woke to clanging dishes and abruptly sat up. He barely missed hitting his head on a low shelf hanging over his cot. The morning sunlight above seeped through tatters in the tarpaulin, but could not make its way into the dark room. More candles had been lit, but the glow hardly illuminated the room. Milligrub continued moving his dishes around his back to Johann. A noise much like snorting came from his throat. The rhythmic snorts made Johann think Milligrub was whistling a song as he worked. A snickering wet laugh interrupted the snorts every so often. Johann slowly stood up, grabbing his pack, and stealthily inched his way to the wall where he felt for an opening. Finding nothing, he stood with his back flat against the wall and inhaled a breath of courage to demand that Milligrub let him out. Just as he opened his mouth, the little creature jerked his head toward Johann, his eyes widening and his mouth hissing, "No!" Milligrub leaped toward Johann, reaching with his furry hands, but stronger hands had grasped Johann from behind, pulling him into the wall. The command that Johann intended to deliver came out of his mouth as a "Ah!" The next thing he knew, Johann found himself in the morning light, sitting on the ground outside the tree. He sprang to his feet and grabbed his pack, wasting no time running up the path. Trees became a blur of brown and green as he continued to run. It wasn't until sharp pains prickled through his oxygen-deprived chest and shoulders that he dropped his pack and bent over. Bracing himself with his hands on his knees, he inhaled and exhaled short breaths. His shirt sagged in front of him, and a golden whistle hung down from his neck, swinging in front of his face. He had forgotten all about it. Putting it in his mouth, he blew. Nothing happened. He blew harder, but still no sound. Slowly straightening up, Johann realized with despair that he was alone, lost on a mysterious mountain, with a broken whistle. He looked down the path behind him. No sign of the furry Milligrub. Neither was there any sign of good master. Johann sighed and lifted his pack to his shoulders. He adjusted the pack and resumed his trek up the path, which wound its way through trees. He didn't know whether his steps moved him closer to his goal or further away, but they surely took him far from the night's misadventure. He hurried along the path. The quick patter of Milligrub's bare feet could be heard on the path. It was then that good master stepped out of the woods, facing the creature, causing Milligrub to run headlong into him and bounce off the solid wall of flesh. Milligrub landed on his back. He sat up, shaking his little head, and looked with fear into good master's face. With cowardly speed, Milligrub began crawling backwards, whining through his pointed teeth until he found his feet and began running back to where he came from, pumping his little arms to gain momentum. Good master broke into a laugh as he turned and headed toward Johann. Chapter 13. A Friendship Restored. Michael knelt beside a clear stream, taking in long gulps of water. He had been sauntering along the path, thinking about different projects he would take on when he returned to the village. He hoped his father wouldn't be too disappointed if Johann's journey was unsuccessful. Michael's father was a strong, kind man who loved his son very much. He had first led Michael to the mountain only a couple of years ago. He had carefully pointed out the crags and cliffs to avoid. He had shown him how to identify the sweet springs that held life-giving water and the tart springs whose seemingly sweet water left the traveler with a bitter, unquenchable thirst. His father, taught by good master, had carefully passed on the lessons to his son. It grieved Michael that Johann had no such man in his life to guide him. Johann had been without his parents since he was a young boy. His mother had become ill and passed away. An accident took his father a few years later, so the elderly widow in the village took him in. Widow McCrae did what she could, but the headstrong boy pushed away any attempt she made to care for him beyond his basic needs. In fact, Johann pushed everyone away. Michael considered himself lucky that Johann would be friends with him at all. Michael's mother had left him and his dad many years ago for reasons Michael had yet to understand. All he knew was that she lived in another village somewhere, and Michael would probably never see her again. Sitting beside the stream, with his knees drawn up, Michael relaxed and looked up at the sky. He thought about Goodmaster's words. How could willbenders help anyone find the treasure? He stood up slowly, in no hurry to continue on the path. If Goodmaster was true to his word, Johann would show up soon. Hoisting his pack to his shoulders, he resumed his stroll. After a few minutes, he heard a familiar call and turned around. Johann ran up to him, breathing heavily. "Oh, you're a welcome sight, my friend," Johann exhaled. "You're not going to believe what I've been through." Michael just smiled and said, "Tell me about it." Johann related everything about the unsettling night. He ended his saga by pulling the chain from inside his shirt and exclaiming, "And this whistle is broken!" "Johann, it's not broken. It just nobody can hear the sound it makes." "Well, I guess nobody can hear it because nobody is who showed up to help me." "I bet you had more help than you realize," Michael replied with a grin. Johann looked at him curiously and then shrugged it off with a nod of his head and kept walking. "So, now what do we do?" he asked Michael. "We?" Michael raised his eyebrows at Johann. "Yeah, we." Johann looked straight at his friend. "About yesterday. You know how it is. I didn't." Johann finally shrugged and smiled, hoping Michael would understand. "Well, first of all, we need to be sure to stay on the path and be on the lookout for more willbenders." "More what?" "Willbenders. Your friend, Milligrub, is actually a willbender. They work for Abernathy Sullivan, and their whole sole purpose is to keep people like us from finding the treasure." "So who's Abernathy Sullivan? I thought he was just a weird old man." "Oh no, he's very dangerous. They say he's been trying to destroy the treasure since the dawn of time. He almost succeeded once, but Goodmaster defeated him. He knows he can never actually destroy it, so ever since then, he just tries to keep others from finding the treasure. He's quite winsome, isn't he?" "Quite what?" Charming. Seemed very trustworthy at first." "Yeah, even so, he gave me the creeps. I didn't like him, but I felt I had to listen to him. He made me start doubting the good master. Hey, speaking of, I haven't even seen him around. Gives me a broken whistle, then doesn't even show up to help." Michael sighed. "How do you know all this stuff, Michael?" Johann stopped walking and looked intently at his friend. "It's not just from hearing stories. What happened to you up here?" Michael fidgeted. "Michael." "All right," he sighed. "I've been here before. I tried to find the treasure once." Johann looked at his friend and then smiled and said, "Well, obviously you needed my help." "Never fear, Johann is here." "Great, we're saved," Michael replied, not trying to hide his sarcasm. Johann ignored the tone. "Well, since you already know what to expect, we can be prepared. Okay, what's next?" "Well, Johann, it doesn't work that way. You see, the challenges change with each climber. We probably won't face the same dangers I did. This is a whole new path. I don't really know what's ahead, but there is someone who does." Michael grinned and pulled out his whistle, blowing silently. At first, Johann looked at Michael's whistle with surprise. It looked worn. Then, as if he had just identified a familiar sound, he understood. He turned around to see Goodmaster standing slightly behind him with his hands behind his back. "Greetings, my little adventurers. What can I do for you?" Michael spoke first. "I think we need some help for the next leg of our journey. Can you help us?" "I thought you'd never ask." He presented 2 leather belts. "For your protection." Michael and Johann each fitted a belt lifted a belt from the man's outstretched hands. A sheath that held a sword hung from the belt. The eager boys grabbed the sword handle and began shouting their best sword-fighting commands as they slowly unsheathed their weapons, but their enthusiasm was short-lived. On guard! Advance! The thin, fragile-looking blades were no more than 10 inches long. You're kidding, Johann growled. Don't you at least have any daggers or something? Be careful, the man warned. They're two-edged and very sharp. These may not look menacing, but trust me, they can be very effective. The disappointed boys inserted the tiny swords back into the sheaths and strapped on the belts. Will you teach us how to use them? Michael asked. Certainly. We'll begin now. Just follow me. Good Master stepped off the path and into the trees. Wait! Johann cried, grabbing Michael's arm. You said not to step off the path. Is this a trick? Michael gazed into the trees at the disappearing figure. It's not a trick. He quickly slipped into the trees. Johann hesitated, looking around nervously. Abernathy Sullivan's voice echoing in his head. He may not want you to have the treasure. Johann shook his head and said aloud, No, Sullivan, you don't want me to have the treasure. Johann stepped off the path and followed his comrades into the trees. The path opened to a marvelous oasis. They looked up to their left at a waterfall that tumbled over a large wall of rock. The wall curved round in front of them, forming a kind of shelter that was almost like a canyon. A pool of clear water gathered at the base of the waterfall, and a small, glistening stream trickled from it, meandering through the canyon like a silver ribbon. The travelers stood directly in front of the stream, gazing with wide eyes at a small field beyond. The rock wall of the canyon beyond the field shielded it from the wind and cast a cool shadow on the dark green grass. Buttercups and marigolds bloomed at the edge of the little meadow, and yellow and white butterflies danced through the blooms. Large stones were piled strategically across the stream, making a sort of natural bridge. Follow me, said Good Master as he stepped across. The boys followed, trying not to slip on the wet stones. The stream was just wide enough to make jumping across impossible. Once on the other side, the boys dropped their packs. Johann looked across to his right and noticed a large flat stone underneath a tree, set with food. Unlike the greasy meat and bruised fruit he received from Millie Grub the night before, this table held fresh, ripe pears, soft flatbread, and goblets of some kind of beverage. A small fire burned inside the stone table. Large rocks surrounded the fire, and small fish lay cooking upon the rocks. As Johann approached, the aroma from the sizzling fish awakened his hunger. Good Master put his hand upon Johann's shoulder and gestured to the table with his other arm. Come, let's eat. As they ate, they spoke of the beauty that surrounded them. They watched a falcon intent on stealing some blue jay eggs from a nest just above them. The jays squawked loud warnings as they flew directly toward the large bird. The falcon would circle high above and wait only to fly down to a branch a few minutes later. The jays did not relax their guard and each time defended their nest with a surprising fierceness. Finally, the falcon abandoned its efforts and soared off in search of an easier breakfast. Good Master laughed heartily. You may have a little peace now, Mr. and Mrs. J. You fought well together. He turned to the boys. Two are always better than one, don't you think? His eyes twinkled as he looked at Johann. I'm beginning to see that, Johann sighed. Will you teach us to use the little swords now? The three walked to the clearing. Good Master picked up a sturdy branch which had fallen from one of the trees, its green foliage still intact. He held the branch out as he instructed the boys. Okay, let's see what you can do. I want you to prune this branch. Chop the leaves off as quickly as you can. One at a time, each boy would run up to shear the leaves off with their tiny swords. The boys yelled as they thrust their swords at the branch. They jumped and flailed about, wielding the tiny blades in a menacing dance of grunts and jabs. But neither boy succeeded in removing even one leaf. Michael pierced a leaf, but Johann said it didn't count for anything. Smiling, good master took Michael's sword and gave him the branch to hold. Let me show you. With an almost imperceptible flick of his wrist, good master swiftly sheared every leaf from its stem, leaving Michael gaping at a bare branch and Johann ogling at the pile of green leaves at his feet. Like that, the quiet man grinned triumphantly. They spent the rest of the day learning and practicing, only stopping periodically to slurp cool water from the stream or rest a few minutes against a tree. Both boys focused on the technique good master taught, flicking their wrists this way and that, until at last severed leaves began falling from their branches. Their young shoulder muscles ached, and their wrists were equally sore. Johann finally sheathed his sword, and with a deep breath declared his practice finished. Michael looked at good master. He nodded his approval, and Michael put away his sword as well. Well done, my little warriors, he said, patting their backs. Now you shall rest and relax. We'll continue in the morning. He motioned to the table, which was again prepared with an evening meal. How did you? Johann stammered. When he turned back, good master was gone. Michael just shrugged his shoulders. The boys stoked the fire, the growing flame giving more light and heat as the sun rapidly disappeared behind the trees opposite the canyon wall. Shadows danced and swayed up the rock as the sun vanished and the flames grew. One large shadow, though, didn't move. Neither boy noticed the two eyes that reflected the glowing flames. Johann spread his blanket out close to the fire and rolled his sweater for a pillow. Michael glanced at his own unrolled pack and then back at Johann, who lay completely relaxed on his blanket, looking at the darkening sky. Silently, Michael walked to his pack and pulled out the 2 pewter plates he had packed. He piled food on each plate and gave one to Johann, who began eating without a word. Michael sighed and unrolled his own pack, arranging a comfortable seat for himself. His food was now cold, but his hunger didn't mind. The dark figure now stepped silently from the shadows into the firelight. Something smells good. Johann barely avoided upturning his entire plate of food as he jumped at the unexpected voice. Michael sat frozen with fingers full of food in his open mouth. Medwin chuckled at the startled boys. One hand hung onto a fishing pole. The other held a strap draped over his shoulder. He presented the strap with 3 small fish attached. Hey, mind if I throw these beauties on your fire and join you? Johann shrugged nonchalantly, picking pieces of food from his lap and putting his dinner back on his plate. Michael looked at Johann, then up at Medwin. Sure, help yourself, Michael said cheerily. Medwin knelt by the fire, arranging the fish on hot, flat rocks to cook. Then he untied a bedroll from his own pack and made himself a comfortable place. After retrieving his own plate, he tried in vain not to burn his fingers as he quickly grabbed the curling tail fins to flip the fish. He shook his large hand and licked his scorched fingertips. The boys shared their food, and soon they were feasting and laughing as Medwin shared stories of his adventures on the mountain. Sure enough, fish hook caught in my pants on the backside. Spider big as my fist dropping down in front of me on the other side. Did you scream like a girl? Johann wanted to know. You would have screamed like a girl. He laughed at Michael, who returned a silent glare. I guess I probably did, and danced like I was barefoot on hot coals. I finally got my pants unhooked and swatted that spider into next week with my fishing pole. Medwin breathed the cooling mountain air like he was taking in a gulp of fresh water. Well, Johann Fowlsworth, have you thought any more of what you'll tell this fine mountain? You figured out who you are yet? Johann's chest swelled with pride as he took a deep breath to answer Medwin's question. Matter of fact, I have. I'm talented and capable, he began, remembering his sword practice with more skill and accuracy than would be evident to anyone else. And brave. He told of the events with Milligrub and Abernathy Sullivan as one of staunch bravery in which he demanded and received release from his incarceration in the mysterious tree trunk. Medwin cut his eyes over to Michael, who raised his eyebrows and shook his head, letting out a quiet sigh. Well then, Medwin clapped his massive hands and rubbed them together. Looks like you're ready as you'll ever be. He looked at Michael. Yep, ready as he'll ever be. Johann caught the mischievous smile between them and again wondered how he missed the joke. Medwin stretched back on his bed and flung an arm over his face. Good night, boys. The boys sat in tired silence until the melody started. What's that? Johann asked. A beautiful, soft melody, as from a pan flute, came wafting through the small canyon. Fireflies appeared here and there, keeping rhythm with their blinking lights. The boys watched the lights dance, mesmerized by the soothing music. Medwin continued sleeping, his snores whiffling in time with the melody. Johann was relaxing into the comforting sounds when he suddenly reached for the sword still strapped about his waist. Hold up! Is this some kind of willbender music? Are we going to be carried off in our sleep? No, Michael replied. Can't you feel it? Feel what? The peace. Yeah, but I don't understand it. This peace is beyond your This peace is beyond your understanding, boys, Medwin muttered from under his arm. Yep, this peace is beyond anyone's understanding. Chapter 14, Pronouncement Peak. Johann rolled onto his back, and though sleep was leaving, he refused to open his eyes. He wondered what the widow McCrae would hound him about today. His mind drifted back into the ethers of sleep. Why don't you go play with that nice boy Michael? He could hear her crackly voice in his mind. Well, I guess you boys are getting too old to play like children do, but I'm sure you could do something. I can take care of everything here today. Go on and enjoy yourself a while, Johann. Reluctantly, he opened one eye. Abruptly, her voice ceased, and the image of her white-gray hair and gray eyes vanished as he realized he was outside, looking into tree branches overhead. Through the branches, he could see twinkling stars and a small white moon. He reached for the little sword still strapped to his hip, and everything came back to him with clarity. He was on a mission to obtain a treasure that would free him from the confines of Mr. Whitaker, Widow McCrae, the village, and everything else. If anyone had asked him what was so horrible about the circumstances of his life, he would not be able to answer. The widow wasn't so bad, and except for Willard Tate, most of the people of the village were pleasant, if not directly to him. But any pleasantness he did receive was born out of pity. He rolled to his side as he remembered them and felt an ache in his chest. He closed his eyes against the memories flooding his mind and waited for sleep to return and rescue him. He saw himself tugging a familiar hand, tears streaming down his cheeks. Other hands were pulling him back, but he refused to let go, all the while crying, "Mommy, don't leave me!" But she did leave him. She had looked at him, formed the words, "I love you," with dry lips, and closed her eyes. And then her hand had gone limp. Through his tears, Johann had looked across the bed at his father who knelt beside her, his head bent, his strong shoulders heaving with quiet sobs. Other hands lifted Johann and carried him to the great room of their house, where he was placed in his bed. He huddled into the corner, clutching a blanket. After a few minutes, his father was holding him, assuring him everything would be fine. But everything had only become worse. 5 years later, his father left him as well. It didn't matter that it was an accident. He was gone, and the 10-year-old boy stepped out of his childhood into an adult world. That was 2 years ago. But that small boy still followed him everywhere. Johann shut his eyes tight against the tears forming in them. But one salty tear trickled down his cheek anyway. Soon he was asleep. "Johann, wake up! The good master's here!" Johann lay curled on his side. Michael shook his shoulder again, but there was no response. Medwin lumbered over and, putting his hands on his hips, surveyed the sleeping one. "That boy's slumbering in the lethargic sleep of apathy. Let him be. He's got a few more trials yet before he'll be able to spring out of a restful sleep and greet good master early in the morning, right?" Medwin grinned at good master and tipped his finger to his head as he bid them goodbye. Grabbing his fishing pole, making sure the fishing hook was securely fixed and anchored to the pole, he started down the mountain. Good master smiled and waved, then beckoned to Michael. "Come, we have things to discuss." When Johann finally opened his eyes, the sun was about to crest the top of the cliff wall to his left. Behind him, the waterfall continued its endless cascade of water rushing over granite boulders. He lay, listening to the rhythmic sound. A gentle breeze rustled the tree leaves above him. He raised himself to one elbow and listened. Far into the distance ahead of him were other mountain ranges rising through the smoky morning mist. Across the stream to his right stood the dark forest through which they had followed good master to this oasis. Excitement welled up in him as he tried to imagine what adventures he might face. But the excitement melted into fear when he remembered Abernathy Sullivan and the Wilbinders who traipsed around this place in any kind of form. Looking around him, he saw Michael at the fire with a breakfast prepared, his bedroll neatly rolled and tied to the bottom of his knapsack. Medwin was gone. "Are we in any hurry?" Johann called to him. "We can't stay in one place too long, I know that much." "Why not?" Johann walked over to his friend, his blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Michael looked at Johann's thick hair sticking up on his head like so much dirty thatch when he looked off into the distant horizon. A soft breeze blew into his face, and he breathed deeply, closing his eyes. "Complacency currents," he exhaled. Johann's brow wrinkled. "They make it too easy to stay here," explained Michael. "If we don't press on now, we'll just stay here." Johann looked around, taking in the beauty again. "Oh, you say that like it's a bad thing. Pronouncement Peak is just up there." Michael nodded to a place above Johann's head. He looked up and saw the flat rock jutting up from the side of the mountain just above the waterfall. "That wasn't there yesterday. How?" It was no use asking. Johann now understood that little about this mountain stayed constant. The sooner he learned to expect the unexpected, the better. We need to get up there now so you can make your announcement. Then we'll have to get somewhere we can practice our skills. The Willbenders can attack here as well as anywhere. Johann picked up a leafy branch and grinned. Here you go, let's practice. That's not enough, Johann. Good Master wants us to get where we can work against something more substantial. When did he say that? This morning, while you were sleeping. I got up early and met with him. He gave me some directions. Here, better eat something. It's probably a bit cold now, but you'll need it. Handing him the pewter plate piled with dried fruit, cooked fish, and flatbread, Michael walked over to the stream to fill their leather flagons with water. Johann ate in icy silence. This was, after all, his journey. Now Michael and Good Master were all chummy, making plans and leaving him out. Oh, it wasn't fair. Why didn't you wake me up? Michael started to respond, but only shook his head. He finished filling their flagons in uneasy silence. Johann watched Michael feel the whistle inside his shirt and clutched it. Michael adjusted the little sword strapped at his hip. Wisps of feathery dark hair framed his face, accentuating his boyish appearance. Michael practiced drawing his little sword and jabbed at the air, his other arm curved about his head for balance. As Johann watched Michael's antics, he exhaled an indignant and thought about how much better he was with the sword. Even with such a small blade, he felt sure he could wield it successfully against any enemy. He learned quickly and had natural agility. He was skilled enough. Let Michael practice. Throwing off his blanket, he quickly and haphazardly rolled it up and tied it to his pack. He scraped off the pewter plate and stuck it just inside the opening of his pack and tied down the leather flap. Hauling it to his shoulders and adjusting his own little sword, he announced, "Okay, let's go." The boys crossed the stone bridge and proceeded out of their oasis. They saw the path to their right. It wound up the face of the mountain to the waterfall, where it turned to the left and no doubt circled back through the bushes. It was then a short distance to the flat outcropping. Johann could see it clearly and knew he could climb up without any problem. In fact, Michael could probably wait for him, but he knew better than to suggest it. As they began making their way up the side, a shadow crossed over them. They looked at each other and froze, then slowly turned to look at the sky. Thin, dark clouds were moving in front of the sun, blowing from the direction they had come. "Oh, great! Not the disgusting rains again," Johann said. "Come on, let's hurry." He nimbly scampered up the rocks like a lizard. Michael pulled himself up the rocky path. The path made a switchback onto a flat shelf. Johann stepped onto the shelf and looked down at Michael, who was plodding carefully up the path. "Would you come up on already?" he called down to Michael. "Well, I don't want to fall. It's not like I just fall on my face, you know. One wrong move here and I'm rolling down all those rocks. You know, I can't climb like you. Go on, I'm right behind you." Michael kept moving carefully and methodically while Johann watched, shaking his head. "You don't need me there anyway. Go on up and make your announcement. By the time you finish, I'll be there." "All right." Johann looked at the gathering clouds and turned, trotting up the path. It turned back again. This time the path narrowed and hugged the mountainside. He would have to press his back against the wall and slowly sidestep about 10 feet to where the path disappeared around the bend, but his pack was in the way. He unbuckled the harness and let the pack fall, dragging it with his right hand. He kicked some small rocks over the edge as he inched his way across. "Hey, watch it! My head's down here!" Michael yelled from below. "Michael, you better stay where you are. The path gets a little narrow up here. I'll be right back to get you." Johann let go of his pack. It was an unnecessary burden. He felt his sword on his hip. Why should he take his pack up there? He wasn't spending the night. Without his burden, he moved with more control, but no faster. When he reached the end of the wall, he stopped. What misadventure awaited him around the bend? His heart began to pound. The pressure throbbed in his ears. Sweaty palms pressed against the rocky wall. He looked up at the clouds and knew he had to keep moving. He sure didn't want to get stuck in that rain on this rocky ledge, alone. He inched around the bend. Fortunately, the path widened a bit, but there was a sheer drop to the right, all the way down to the falls far below. Fear gripped Johann, and he slowly inched down, kneeling on his hands and knees. The ledge of Pronouncement Peak lay a few yards ahead. As he crawled, he began seeing bits of images in his mind. He and Michael at Whitaker's Market, where he had helped himself to more than a few fresh strawberries, while old man Whitaker wasn't looking. He saw himself grabbing a ball from some children playing in a yard and tossing it to Michael, who returned it to the crying children. He saw himself sitting with Michael, annoyed as his friend tried to speak to Grace Hobbs. Johann inched his way along, feeling as burdened as if he still carried his pack. Now he saw himself and Michael in Miss Mayhew's sitting room, her eyes aglow as she recounted younger days while he huffed impatient sighs. Unexpected tears began stinging his eyes. He saw Willard Tate's bulbous, laughing face, and anger clenched his throat. Then he saw himself yelling angrily at the widow and storming out of her small, safe house. The whistle swung its way out of his shirt, and he sat back on his knees, clutching it. He blew it with force. "Keep going, Johann." It was Good Master's voice, but he couldn't see him, nor could he tell from where he came. The voice seemed to be everywhere at once. Johann crawled further. He saw himself at the campfire as Michael puttered about alone, serving their dinner. He continued to crawl, his head hanging down. "Who are you, Johann?" Johann looked up. He was on the flat rock of Pronouncement Peak. Emotion choked his throat. I'm selfish," he stammered. He looked up at the leaden sky. "I'm just a selfish boy," he mumbled. "A scared, selfish boy." Now anger spilled out of his mouth as he stood and yelled, "I'm just a scared, selfish, miserable boy." A great clap of thunder resounded and shook the rock, sending Johann to his knees. He flattened himself on the rock face down. Everything became quiet. Johann choked back his tears and swallowed his emotions with a deep breath. After a few silent minutes, he stood and turned to see Good Master on the path, leaning against the wall, his arms casually crossed across his chest. "Now, you can get started," the man said. "Let's go." Good Master pushed himself from the wall and walked nimbly down the path that Johann had just crossed on his hands and knees. Then he disappeared around the bend. Johann followed, but not quickly. With his back flat against the wall, Johann carefully slid his feet down the rocky path. Slide together, slide together. He pressed sweaty palms against the rock wall and dared not look down, but looked out at the dark clouds that were now dispersing. Johann rounded the bend and saw his pack up ahead, but Good Master had again vanished. He grabbed the pack and dragged it behind him as he trudged on. Michael sat on the path, leaning comfortably against the rock, legs crossed, stabbing and jabbing at the air with his little sword. He looked up at Johann. Everything go okay? Johann wrinkled his brow and pursed his lips as he thought. Michael looked up at his friend expectantly. Johann only hoisted his pack to his shoulders and shrugged as he buckled his burden. Finally, he spoke. Yeah, pretty good. Did you hear that thunder? I heard it loud and clear. All right, last chapter for tonight, number 15. Practice makes perfect. The two stepped cautiously into the forest, each with his hand resting warily on the hilt of his sword for good measure. The eerie call of a hawk somewhere above gave a warning as they walked among the dark trees. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, making slanted lines of smoky gray around them. Johann couldn't see them, but he knew that with every step they took, things scurried and moved under the wet, dead leaves on the ground. They walked faster. Johann spoke first. How do we know this is the right direction? Good master said to trust him and not to lean on my own understanding, he quoted. He said to just take off through the trees and he would make a path for us. They kept walking in silence. Johann looked over at Michael and noticed him clutching his shirt. The whistle. He was always holding that whistle. Johann felt his own chest through his shirt. The hard lump of metal was still there. He clutched it as well, but he didn't understand what good it would do. Do you see a path? Michael asked nervously. Johann looked around. Hey there! Just a few yards ahead and to the right, they saw a footpath, curving through the trees and illuminated by the sunlight. Both boys raced to it, as if their very lives depended on the sanctuary the path would offer. Breathless and laughing, they stood for a minute to contemplate which direction they should go. They stood on the path, looking one way, then the other. The path disappeared into trees either way. Well, now what? Johann looked earnestly at his friend. They stood looking up the path, but neither stepped forward. Each one reached into his shirt and withdrew his whistle. Both boys smiled and nodded as they put their whistles into their mouths and blew. A strong breeze blew back in response, pushing their backs. Johann shrugged and began walking. He looked back at Michael, who was still looking about. You coming? He called. Michael jumped a little, then ran to catch up. Michael, tell me about when you were here before, on this mountain. Michael inhaled deeply. He began to tell Johann of the time, not too long ago, when his father had brought him to the mountain. Yes, he wanted Michael to find the treasure, but not as an adventurous treasure seeker. Michael stopped short. You mean like me? Johann asked. Michael continued his story. The power, his father had explained, was beyond any mortal comprehension and necessary to sustain life forever. Whew! You mean we could become immortal? Johann asked, pleased with the idea. Yeah, something like that, Michael replied. So what? Did you and your dad give up? The mountain, did it defeat you like you said it could? He shrugged and wrinkled his nose. In a way, I guess. Johann became silent again. He wouldn't press Michael any more about his failure. He knew Michael's father, a nice, quiet man. Johann had known him, in fact, his whole life. His own father had been friends with him. Johann now remembered overhearing them talk before the accident. They were sitting in front of the fireplace. I don't know, Marcus, his father had said. You can easily guide Michael. He listens to you, but my Johann is so headstrong, I don't even think I can do it. I know I must, though. At the time, Johann thought his dad was planning a fishing trip. Had his father planned to bring him to the mountain, as Michael's had? He now remembered his father had once mentioned something about the mountain. Johann was more interested in thinking about how he might use Mr. Gowan's pig to lure unsuspecting village boys to slide into a mud hole. Shortly after, his father was gone, and Johann paid no attention to mountain stories. His stomach began to rumble, and he looked at Michael. "You hungry?" "Little bit." Up ahead, something caught Johann's eye. A large dark tree, quite different from the rest, stood up from the forest beside the path. Glossy dark green leaves stretched from the ground up to the top, some 20 feet above, making it appear to be more of a giant bush. No branches could be seen, and in the middle, just at arm's length, hung a bright yellow fruit that looked like a pear. Johann walked up to it and lobbed off the pear with the sword. He rubbed it on his pants and took a bite. Sweet juiciness ran down his chin. Michael saw another pear just above Johann's head and drew his sword. Johann stepped out of the way, thick leaves tickling his ears as Michael severed a pear. As the two stood eating their pears, the bush tree began to shake. Pears began protruding from the leaves all around them. Before they knew it, pears and leaves were literally enveloping them, pulling them off the path and into the bush. Oh, they began lobbing off pears with their little swords, trying to make an opening for an escape. Johann, his teeth clamped down on his pear, could only grunt as he whacked at all the fruit all around him and pulled at vegetation with his free hand. Michael, who had dropped his pear, was yelling at Johann as he attacked the bush with equal vehemence. "Johann, get out! Hurry!" Although whacking at pears was similar to yesterday's leaf practice, the speed and strength needed to free themselves from this strange plant was almost more than they could handle. Finally, both boys were able to push through the vegetation. Dropping their swords, they rolled down the path and stopped on top of each other. A pile of arms and legs and knapsacks. They tried to scramble to their feet, slapping and pulling at each other. "Get off my foot! Ow, your elbow in my face! Ow, that's my ear!" At last they sprang to their feet, straightening their packs and grabbing their swords. The tree bush stood motionless and devoid of any fruit. Ripe pears spread on the path before it. With a great huff, Johann sheathed his sword, bent down, and quickly picked up 2 pears, running back from the tree before anything could grab him. He tossed one pear to Michael as they hurried down the path. "What in the world was that?" he asked. "I don't know," Michael replied. "Practice?" Johann took a last bite of his pear, turned around, and threw the core back down the road. Up ahead, the path came to a 3-pronged fork. To the left, a path disappeared into the shadows of the forest. To the right, it meandered up to a small path and seemed to disappear into the mountain itself. Straight ahead, the path continued wide and open and waiting. The 2 boys stood still, staring from one path to the other. "Okay, I've been fooled by one of these before. You don't want to get off the main path, that's for sure. Straight ahead." And he proceeded forward up the path. "Wait a minute," Michael says. He pulled his whistle out. "Let's make sure." He blew on the silent instrument. In a moment, good master stood behind them. "Wondering which way to go?" the kind man asked. "I'm not," Johann replied confidently. "Straight ahead, that's where I'm going." "Are you giving up so easily?" "I thought you wanted to pursue the treasure, not return home." Johann flushed scarlet. The corners of Michael's mouth turned up, but he quickly pursed his lips and furrowed his brow in mock contemplation that didn't fool Johann. "All treasure hunters should bear to the right," good master announced. Then he fixed his eyes on Johann and said, "Trust me." A cold chill ran through Johann. He shrugged his shoulders. All right, he mumbled and trudged toward the narrow path. Michael followed at his heels. Goodmaster watched them disappear into the forest. Be strong and courageous, my son, he whispered. And that is the end of our reading for today. Glad we could do this. And there are 25 chapters in the story, so we will have 2 more sessions after this. And I look forward to finishing this book and seeing how it ends. All right, everyone, have a good night.